Good afternoon. I'd like to take this opportunity of welcoming you to the second part of the afternoon session. So before I do that, just want to talk a little bit about the DXC community. So this fall, IRI, the Innovation Research Interchange, has launched a digital transformation community, which we call the DXC, because every good community has to have a good acronym. So the DXC is a community of organizations that are on the journey toward digital transformation. The community offers IRI members a safe space to discuss the challenges of moving towards things like Industry 4.0, IIoT, etc. This fabulous conference was brought to you by the DXC, and in addition to this conference, we have events such as monthly thought leader interviews and case studies. And on that latter topic, our next talk features the learnings from our first case study, which is of the Michelin company. And this is going to be brought to us by RTI's Innovation Advisors. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage Jason Norman, who is the VP of Innovation, and Tom Culver, who is a Senior Innovation Advisor, lead strategic foresighting, both from RTI Innovation Advisors, to speak to you about digital value creation. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me okay? Great. We got some interesting color things going on here. It seems that the technology is here helping us on these digitalization conversations. So welcome everybody. I just want to tee this up. Tom Culver is really going to be the person that is talking about the case study. I just want to sort of like present, set the scene up. Before I get onto this, I just learned this morning that great news in my household. The chrysalix that has been like lounging around in our living room has finally, a butterfly has emerged from it. This is something that the children have been like looking at for the last 2 weeks. I thought they were dead. But apparently a black swallowtail butterfly is now flapping around in this little torture chamber. Hopefully the kids will let it out. I bring this up because that was a transformation. That was a transformation from a caterpillar that ate huge quantities of parsley to a butterfly that hopefully will be released and will continue its life and do whatever swallowtail butterflies do. Its journey will then end. So when we talk about transformation, it's almost like there is an end point that we are discussing. When we talk about digital transformation, however, I think we're getting some of the language mixed up. I prefer the term evolution, digital evolution, because what this is, there is no destination here. This is something that we have started and that we are continuing. And that will not stop at some point in 3 years' time when we will have digital projects going on. This will be something that is just part of our lives moving forward. And so when we talk about this, we have to think about it as what's the long game here? If you have very good eyesight, you might see in the middle of this, there is some like gray text. The middle of this is really meant to represent like a sequence that a digital project would typically go through. So we have kind of an engagement phase, design, analyze, and then deliver the results. The point of this slide is to say these digital projects all interact with different parts of the organization. They interact with the people, they interact with customer experience, they can change the business model, and ultimately the whole ecosystem. I won't go through the details of this, but really what digital transformation is about enabling new growth. It's a new growth strategy. It is akin to innovation 10, 15 years ago, similar in some ways to nanotechnology and the hype associated with that. But really this is a way of like enabling the next phase of business growth. We create new digital products and services, but really this is impacting all parts of an organization. And what we're seeing is where organizations that have lots of silos, digital transformation and the digitization projects, they cross those silos and they're requiring the barriers of those silos to become permeable. When you have good permeation between the silos, good communication, good collaboration, that's what a good digitalization project needs. So, as was previously mentioned, this is the first of 6 case studies that we're doing in conjunction with the IRI community. This one is on Michelin, so I'll get Tom up on stage as soon as possible. What we're going to do, and what you have on your chairs there, it's a basic high-level digital evolution assessment. And what we hope to do here today is collect information from from the audience. We want to sanitize that and report back to the community where we are with regard to the journey and where we are on that journey today. And monitor that over the next 2 years as we conduct the rest of the case studies and show how the community itself is developing and our understanding of digitalization is progressing. This is an amazing picture of some waves crashing across the shore. Tom, I'm not sure how this is going to work with your slides, but really the point I just want to make is that digitalization is about change management. If you hear about the success stories, you'll hear a lot about the success of engaging leadership, engaging people. Similar to innovation, digitalization it's about getting the change management components in order. If you get those in order, the technology part itself is relatively straightforward. I say that in quotes. Yeah. I think I'm going to get off stage and just get Tom up here. Okay, you're going to have to struggle with some interesting slides here. Okay, so that's me. Thank you. I want to introduce Tom. Tom's been part of the team for over 17 years, and before that he was doing technology development in industry for about 12 years. He works on tech scouting, tech landscaping, commercialization, go-to-market, wealth of experience, and Tom Culver.
One of the things, big realizations here still, I was just mentioning this somewhat at Novozymes, turns out we did a big study, and it turns out your companies are still driven by people. And so as a result, we have to think in terms of the same basic principles of change management when we apply to digital transformation, digital evolutions, as we do to any change management. So sometimes, and I've had a few comments from people who are a little bit like, wow, I realize we're so far behind and we have so far to go, and defining digital is going to be this huge thing. But there are things we do know how to do well in organizations. We can do change management, just like we did with the quality movement, like we've tried to do with innovation. So let's draw on our strengths and think about it in a change management perspective, which is what we're going to do. And good change management usually follows, there's Kotter's model. Deming, who you guys probably all are well aware of from the lean manufacturing operational excellence, right, that we were all grilled with, he was ultimately around change management. And so there's lots of models, but let's just take a simple one here. There's some impetus, some burning platform that gets us to change. We start prepare for it, and then we start taking some actions. And if we're good at this, we can then maintain our successes and then transform and evolve the organization over time through changing the beliefs, the culture systems, the capabilities, the competencies of our organization. If one thing we know, it's apparent, is what organizations do today is going to look a lot different 10 years from now. Right? I had someone say to me the other day, is that pace of change right now is the slowest it will ever be. I was like, wow, okay, that's a little daunting. Think about that. We always think about it's getting faster, but it's slowest today. So our organizations are going to have to change at a pace we're not accustomed to. So we have to really be diligent about the change we want to bring to people. So in our case studies, we are going to look at what was the impetus, the preparation, action, and maintenance. And we're going to do it in a real case study with Michelin. We're lucky enough to have Mike Marchand here from Michelin. He's going to refute or validate all of my comments throughout. If you guys want, make sure I'm actually not making this stuff up, which sometimes I want to do. But we're going to walk through this to try and bring some insights. So The lenses you'll see on your worksheets, there's 6 lenses that we go through, and they involve the opportunities and offerings. So this is, what are the digital products we're doing? What are the opportunities we're seeing in the market? How are we reading the opportunities and challenges our competitors? It's about strategy, it's about organizational structures, it's about the people that we bring to it and how we train them. It's the resources, the infrastructure. A lot of times, and I've heard this refrain even a few times, yeah, but we're still waiting for the data. You know, once we get the data, once we get it cleaned up. But do you think your organization, the people in your organization are all sitting around, I'm waiting for the data? Of course not. They're looking for leadership. They're looking for people here who are trying to put the pieces together. And this is a simple construct. The 6 lenses is a simple construct that you can use. You can take back to your organization and think about it. You know, this morning we heard about what it means to be a digital organization, the digital first strategy, 9 components. But when you think about what it calls upon organizations to do, is a dramatic reimagination, a reevaluation of your business. So if you're a startup and you have $50 million of VC funding, you can basically build this thing up from scratch as a digital organization. But raise your hands. How many of you are in incumbent legacy organizations that have deep roots in the physical, resource-based economy? Right, so there's this catch. How is it that we're supposed to transform and perform at the same time, right? And so again, let's draw on one of the things we've learned about in IRI a lot is this ambidextrous organization. You know, these are theories that come to us through innovation. We have to set up structures, governance, incentives that help people keep the business running, yet at the same time do the change management to become nimble and agile and new in different ways, which is what has demanded us with digital transformation. So, we're losing all images here. So you can imagine there's some graphics to go along with this, but now it's been reverted back to PowerPoint by death with bullet points. So I'm going to tell stories as we go. Michelin is an old company. It's been around for a long time. It's around the world, and it's a big company. You know, billions of dollars, global factories around the world driving business. So this probably looks and feels a lot like some of your companies, right? We've been around for a long while. We do things, we're distributed, we're a complex organization. We're going to talk about how Michelin did its transformation. One of the key things that happened, though, is the leadership changed, and Mr. Senard came in as the managing director, and he took a long view. And so part of taking a long view meant that this was part of their culture. Michelin actually looks out 50 years in advance. 50 years for a tire company to think about the future of transportation and how people will move. So when you take a long view, you start thinking about what's the impact years and years and years ago about the emerging digital economy. And that's exactly what they did. And they asked the question, instead of how long can we wait and react once we see what others are doing, but instead, how can we be proactive? Get ahead of the game. Get ahead of the curve and go explore this. And so that's what they did as an intentional strategy. And by then, they'd started hiring companies that gave them telematics, that gave them e-commerce, etc. But they really initiated initiative around digital transformation itself around 2015. So the story I'm going to tell you has basically evolved since then. So what you see is one of the key things they decided to do right at the back. And by the way, we have the case study is available online. How many read the case study or saw it beforehand? So you have a sense of it. Very good. We have copies outside, so you can read through it, bring it back to your organization. This is the whole point. This is not to have something that is just, you know, a white paper or something. Take it back. Use the information with your organization. Not because you're going to come up with the right answer or say, hey, how can we, you know, copy what Michelin did, but how can you drive conversations in your organization to develop a shared mental construct, a shared language about how you're going to do digital evolution in your organizations. So, back to the story. One of the things they did is they did not hire an insider. They brought somebody from the tech industry. And they also made sure that when they created this chief digital officer position, which was new to them, they decided to have him report to the operating officer because they knew something about their culture, which is that they were a culture and a business driven by operations and execution. They run factories. That is bread and butter of their business. So by making digital part of operations and relying on that, it was going to be built into the fabric of their organization through the structure. So that was one thing that they did. And they chose some focus areas. And the primary one was on customer. They knew, the managing director, Senard, knew from talking to their largest clients and their employees and customer feedback that the customer experience was not great. And so he decided this would be where they would focus. So this was the impetus and preparation that they saw that got them really going down the digital evolution pathway. So you can see some of the other aspects of doing this, but they set up an advisory board, they tied it to business units, and I'm going to talk about those more. So we are now going to walk through the 6 lenses and talk about what they did as a way of explaining across many facets of digital transformation how the organization tackled this and evolved over time. So one of the things the instinct was at Michelin is develop, Mike, correct me if it's wrong, but it's 5-10-year planning because it's a long-range planning cycle. And the CDO said, hey, look, the technology is going to change so fast and the pace at which we're going to need to respond is so little that we really can't take this long view. We have to, so he actually had to argue with the advisory board and the board members that we should just do a rolling 3-year strategy, but I'm going to tie it to operational goals. And that's where we're going to be measured. We're going to do metrics on execution. So one point about strategy is they brought in consultants from the outside to help them think about the strategy, but one of the things that Eric Chagnot decided was, you know, our strategy is not going to look too different than our competitors. Where we're going to win is on execution. So we'll set up a strategy, but then we need to execute. So hence tying it there. This also allowed him then to make the case to get funding and autonomy because it was tied to operating and very fast. So let me just tell you a quick story. He went in there to the board to make the case that he needed to do the strategic approach. And they said, well, of course, what kind of work will you do? And he said, I have 5 projects, 5 or 6 projects. I can tell you about one of them. They were seeing their tires sold online through Amazon. And so immediately the question comes, what's the pricing model? What's going on? And so that was one. And he told the board, look, I've got 5 projects. I'm going to do all of them in 8 weeks. They said, wait, you don't understand it. Michelin, we do projects over years. That's the way it's done, right? This is a story from Eric. I'm not making this up. And so he said, no, 8 weeks. I'll do them. And so one of them was this web crawling and going, and within 3 or 4 weeks, they'd scrape data off of Amazon and other platforms to get pricing data about how their products, their competitors' products were being sold online versus their distributor network, which they had tons of data on. And by doing that, he showed the power and insight that can be done from good digital projects, but also at the pace of digital. Because he wanted to lay down the moniker that digital needs to work fast. And so he did all 5 of those projects in 8 weeks, which really bought him a lot of credibility. So if you're starting up and trying to execute strategy, move fast, start small, but show some impact. Now these are kinds that make sense. So now let's look at the structures. As I mentioned, he wasn't coming up through the traditional IT structures, right? Again, there's this ambidexterity. You have to have IT infrastructure and groups that keep the lights on, that make sure the plants are running, to make sure everybody has a laptop with the latest software that has good cybersecurity on it. That's a hard job in itself. Now, if you ask the IT organization to go do a bunch of other stuff, you have to really be intentional about it. Michelin decided to separate the two, keep it outside, but this wasn't some disconnected ivory tower thing. What they did was they created digital factories, teams of digital natives, people hired in from the outside. And I'll talk about the numbers in a minute. It's very impressive. And they actually sited the digital factories where their real factories were. And those teams were embedded with the business units, embedded regionally to respond to regional operational and customer-centric challenges and bring the power of digital to solve BU problems right there together, as opposed to being isolated away at some corporate center. So this was a very intentional approach that Michelin took. But all the projects that the BUs didn't have to be done by the digital team, but had to be reviewed and covered by it. This enabled them to get laser-like focus regionally on customer centricity and say, how do we serve our customer? And the digital transformation teams helped the business units focus there. And that was really the pointy tip of the spear that they drove. And that really accelerated over time as they got more comfort and more activities around it, and I'll talk about some of those in a moment. So the next lens we're looking through is resources. How did they resource doing all of this work? One of the things they decided is that they needed to build internal competency. They weren't going to outsource digital excellence, digital capabilities to others. They were going to build it internally themselves. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't partner, but it's a philosophical decision you have to make. Are we going to commit to make a digital transformation where we build our competencies, or are we going to rely on others? And they very effectively decided they would come in. And then this next point you can see, when Eric started, he took 6 people that were internal that really weren't digital folks, but they knew the business well. But they were now responsible for making digital happen. And then over a course of 4 years, by hiring external people to come in and be experts, 600. Think about that. That's a 100-fold increase in people focused on making Michelin digital every single day. So a huge commitment and resource. So how did they do that? They actually took resources out of the legacy businesses to fund it. And that was driven, obviously, from the top down, and said, we're going to make this happen. But it was because they were going to lift all the boats around a uniform customer-centric experience so that there was one Michelin. Okay? But the other thing that they tied into that's hidden in here is one of the key aspects of Michelin culture was respect for expertise. So they'd built this business on expertise for people who were rubber experts or operational experts, etc. And those experts were given a lot of credibility and respect in the organization. And so they said, these are digital experts that have come from other industries. They're here to help us. They leveraged that communication, that cultural norm, and said, these are the experts who are going to help us get there. So that's something for you all to reflect on. Your cultures are not going to go away. How do you leverage the strengths of your culture to express it through a digital evolution? So that's a really interesting point, because change management, as I said, is often about people. So if you can leverage people, I remember a long time ago, one of my bosses said to me, people don't mind to be part of change. They just bristle at being changed. And so often when we say, you've got to change. That's hard if you're going to come at change management that way. But if you can engage people in the change, right, that's really powerful. And I think that's how you start to think about how can we leverage our existing culture to engage people in the change that they expect to see. Okay, so what this meant then is then they had to really engage people in the change. And Mike was telling me you get newsletters weekly on digital initiatives. They started very intentional communication. They've trained all sorts of people around this. They have different levels of digital competency you can build by yourself online. But they also have these new platforms for a one Michelin, so they can help them view customers and see what's going on in this customer-centric model. And they've gotten many certificates. So look at the numbers of people trained and engaged in this, right? And this doesn't necessarily mean recreating a new mechanism. Your corporations already do a lot of communications to people. They already have mechanisms to do online training, etc. It's thinking about how do we build this into our business operations, right? So part of resourcing this is making it become part of the business or operations. Okay. One of the biggest things, though, that I thought was really interesting is that they found that when you were saying, hey, we're going to go do this from the top down, and we're going to drive this initiative, they weren't getting the engagement in the people that they were expecting. They tried a variety of different ways to do, CEO forum level kinds of things that you all might be familiar with to launch this, but the uptake wasn't as fast. So what they did is they had these embedded digital factories, and they created digital weeks. And those 600 experts now who are vested, known part of the business, were there in those digital weeks in really structured ways to engage the business peer-to-peer to help them learn, help them practice projects, help them see the impact of these things, right? And so it was a real grassroots feeling experience of having this digital factories really coming to life inside their own organizations. So I mentioned about culture, but a few points about this. They recognized that there were going to be people who were early adopters, or they used the analogy, and I think it's in the case study around permafrost. Like you can get the top layer with a little bit of warming, it'll soften up, right? But to get to the next layer, you can't get to that next layer until you soften up the top layer. And then there's going to be the permafrost that are never going to do anything, they're entrenched. What they realized was they were spending a lot of time and energy on the permafrost, and they said, forget it. We're going to focus on the people at the top, and we're going to make some progress there, the early adopters, the people who are willing and able. You all know in your organizations that these things happen. This is part of change management. There's resistance to change, and you have to find those people who are not resistant to change, who want to participate, support them, create environments for them to do that, and invest there where change can happen. Instead of, resourcing to argue with the vocal few who are dug in and never going to change, right? It's a defeating battle, and you actually create more competition for noise around whether we're going to succeed or not than if you just go with the people who want to do something and make things happen. That's how the things get going. So I talked about digital weeks, etc., and that expertise piece. So leveraging culture but being very intentional about it. This is one of the things that I think is cornerstone to what we're trying to bring through these case studies, the assessment, etc. That this evolution is a change management process, and you have to bring the people along, and the culture is a significant piece about it. So you almost need to really think about the incentives. We know HR, they do incentives, right? But think about the transformation you're talking about. You're asking people to reskill mid-career, or accept people who come into their organization with entirely new talent sets that they don't have, and you're saying these people are the future. You're asking people to pick up the pace of change of their work, learn at a pace they've never learned before. This is really hard stuff. How do you create the incentives for that change? You have to be really intentional about that. And so we can talk about data, and did we push things to the cloud, and did we get security at the edge, and do we have clean, conditioned, curated, collated, analyzed data that goes into the AI, and then someone to look at it the outside to verify it? Yes, you have to do all those things. But do you think if you say, hey, look, our AI modeled work, that's going to change the organization? No, that's one conversation one day. This is all about how do you create the incentives. So really think about in your organizations, what are those incentives that will shape and drive your culture? And it's not going to be by looking at Michelin case study. It's going to be about knowing your own culture and having people who really deeply think about incentives in your organization. Okay, the one that everybody likes to talk about. Yeah, but it's all about tech and data, right? Digital, that's what it is. It's this move from physical to whatever. And this morning we looked at, there's a lot of different ways that Professor, you presented to us about how to think about what it means to be digital. And it all relies on really leveraging deeply and understanding the power of digital. So yes, you have to do that. And it's going to be built on good technology and data, but it's a mindset, right? And you start seeing that. And that's the mindset is what's going to change the organization. So you want to use a very intentional experiments, move fast and small like I talked about. And in fact, with these guys, they didn't start or require the use of IT to do their work. They worked independently. They were smart enough digital natives to do it. Later projects then were able to do it across scale. Getting this customer one Michelin, you're not going to do that with independent digital factory folks. This is going to be a huge initiative that has to engage a lot of IT people. But they had built and demonstrated credibility. One of their learnings was, though, data quality was an issue from the beginning. And they said, if we had waited for good data, we would have done nothing, right? But they also recognized they should have made a chief data officer and a second appointment right behind the chief digital officer in retrospect, because data needed that specific attention and no one could really drive that unless they associate. So now they have this three-legged bar stool around digital. It's the CIO, the CDO for data, CDO for digital. And that now is a much more collaborative, and they're driving initiatives collaboratively to make this happen.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Chief data officer reports into which leader?
I think, do you know, from Jim? Yeah. I'm not sure what the reporting structure is there, whether he reports up dotted line to like the CEO or the CIO, how they're set up. And I think those things have evolved over time. I think that's where they started out for sure, is where the chief digital officer reported. I'm not sure where he reports now. But interestingly, when I talked to Eric, he said that was probably the best, smartest first decision they made, was how they did the structure and governance, right? It wasn't an, hey, you know, like we talk about in our organization, availability is not a skill. Think about that. Availability is not a skill. And how many times do we do that? Well, like, you know, God, you know, we got this whole IT department, they're available. Yeah, they're available running the business, you know, and it may not be that their skill sets are there. And it's also not like, well, that's a sharp analytics guy. He, you know, a few years ago, he did some applied statistics. Let's make him in charge of ML because he doesn't have anything to work on. She's really great in marketing. She's wonderful. She's super analytical. She should re-envision what our digital thing should be, because it's all about marketing, right? You'll hear these conversations, and when you hear them, you should say, wait a second, this is bigger, right? How can we stop the conversation and think across all of these lenses and make sure we're really thinking about the decisions? So now we have opportunities and offerings. And I put this at the end, but this is probably the most important part. When you're conceiving of a digital transformation, there has to be a burning platform about why is it that we're going to invest the time and effort it's going to take. And in this case with Michelin, they made it about customers and experience. So a couple stories. They decided that they would make some offerings like a mobile app, right? Seems logical. A lot of companies are developing them. So they did that. The digital team helped them. One of the business units wanted to do it. And they said, gosh, we'll just create this Michelin app. And they looked at it after a little while, and they said, why isn't anybody coming to our app? Well, it never occurred to the people who were the app developers thinking about Michelin that had worked on it, the broader context of you have to create a reason for them to come to the Michelin app. And there's a million apps out there. It's not that you build it, they will come. So the digital factory teams actually had to work to broaden the perspectives. Like when you go and launch into additional area, a digital area, you have to think about the whole ecosystem, the channels, all of the layered architecture that we talked about this morning, right? There's channels and what's the software going to do, and all those things have to be thought. Another example was down in Latin America, they put together a supplier portal, and they created it. It was going to be this great place, but they never engaged the suppliers in the region to come get on the portal, right? So they had to really engage the ecosystem, really engage people who would download an app in ways that the business wasn't used to doing, because a lot of the traditional business model was distributor network, right? Everything was being changed. So you have to reframe the businesses, as we've talked about much of today. You've heard from a lot of places, but that means the people who are running this have to bring that mindset, that broader awareness from the get-go. You can't just assume, if I say go make an app, well, I'm a developer, I can do that. They've thought through the business constructs. What does it mean for Michelin to now have an app? What are all the other things that have to happen? As Jason said, there's those layers that ripple out. There's a whole ecosystem out there you have to consider. Okay, yeah?
So how did they manage through changing with the distributor network? Did the distributors to buy into using the app? Or
I think they still have, it's a yes and. So they still have it, but they're trying to do some of these early digital experiments to figure out in local regions how to get better customer engagement and allow customers to do it. So I think what it may be, some of the early apps were actually for the distributors to go on, you know? So it was helping them engage their ecosystem. Okay, So much more customer-centric approach, and then this in turn has created new opportunities for customer engagement. So what they're starting to see, and the reason I have this bullet point, is you start to get the flywheel going, you start to see momentum, and it starts to pick up the benefits you want to see. But it has to be this intentional thing about thinking about where are the opportunities to do this, and then very conscientiously building the offerings to meet those opportunities. So this is where you start. Customer centricity was the burning platform, and then what are the digital experiments, the digital offerings we're going to do to engage our customers to get that momentum going? That was how they really sort of drove this, and that was a central point for the opportunity. That was the why of doing digital. Okay. So, lessons learned. It's a journey, right? And it's going to change how things work, and it's going to change a lot, but it's going to take some time, right? And so, one of the things that I have heard, Jason was just meeting with a client yesterday, and the executives are impatient. They've said, why haven't we got the impact we were supposed to get yet? And this is a real challenge, because when you want to move at the pace of digital and show value from these complex tools and get the data, it takes time. But this is why you need somebody really thinking across all of these lenses and being put all the pieces together and then show progress and metrics against each one of these lenses, but it takes time. And I think if you can set out that vision, the complexity of that vision, the realm of that transformation, then you can start having a dialogue that says, let's be paced. We can do certain things fast, but we have to build the culture over time. Okay. You have to broaden the understanding, new mindsets, new conceptions of what it means to be a digital functioning business. Moving from a physical realm to a digital realm is a really big mind shift in terms of how you create value with the customers, right, and what they expect. And big investments and choosing aligning purpose. We talked about those. So some of these things that I've already mentioned, alignment with strategic goals. Obviously, it needs to be strategically aligned, and they did that around customer. Was one of their big strategy pieces. So that was one of them. One of the things you can see, though, is that if the digital factory people had holed themselves off and made themselves this ivory tower, like, well, we're the digital people, it would have been really hard. They got in, rolled up their sleeves, and they worked with the businesses to solve business problems. You know, one of the things was getting just a good CRM system, going. And so that seems like, for a lot of people, like that doesn't feel like digital transformation. But you got to put in the infrastructure you can get to get your ultimate objective. And if you don't have good CRM stuff in place, you can't be a customer-centric company, right? And so one of the things we always say is, you can only innovate on the infrastructure that's in place. That's true for railroads 150 years ago. It's true for airplanes. And guess what? It's true for the digital world. But now your infrastructure doesn't just include your own IT department. It might also involve partners or Amazon or something. And so that requires a big leap out of your normal way of thinking about a physical resources economy into a digital economy. And again, this last one, there'll always be data issues. So if you wait until you solve the data issues, you probably will have neglected all of these other things that really have to change the organization. So those are the lessons learned. Great picture there. Next, and then we're going to ask you now, because we have time, and this is part of IRI, is to get you guys not just to sit and listen, but to think. If you're there with your teammates, colleagues from your organization, you're sitting next to them, this is a good time. Reflect on your own organization's digital evolution. So we've given you some papers here, and we have the definitions if you want to refer to the 6 lenses, just as just a framing. But this digital evolutions assessment survey here, and it's very simple. All you have to do is go through the different lenses and say, where are we at today? So this is similar to what we've done earlier on this morning. But unlike the one this morning, we're actually going to try and collect these. So we'll have somebody at the back collecting them. But like Jason said at the beginning, we're going to capture some data from the entire group. And then over the years, we'll see how collectively it's going. It should only take you a few moments. This is your chance to chat, be silent thinkers, whatever your preference is. But just go through and think about for opportunities and offerings, like currently where are we at? Do we sort of informal? And there's some different definitions up at the top there. Provisional, managed, optimized, innovative. And where do you think your organization wants to be in a few years? There's no right answer, but this examples a very common change management technique, right? Let's just practice change management 101. Let's bring tools like this into our organizations and start having a conversation. And if you have one group that says, oh, we're rocking it, and another group over there says, what? Where's the coffee? What's this meeting about? You know, these are the differences that you have to rectify, and you can start to see where do we have those differences and where are we aligned. So spend a few moments, and then we'll start at the back and do that. But before I go up there, is there any questions either about the Michelin case study or the exercise? Yeah?
So the big scary number is 6 to 600? Right?
Yeah. Well, scary or inspirational? It's your choice, right? So what's your question about that? Your inspiring question.
My inspiring question, so the 6 to 600, and you made a comment that resources were taken out of the BUs and put into this team. So what was the net add?
We weren't given those numbers.
Take a swag at it.
I have no idea. I wouldn't want to postulate. You, Mike, do you want to postulate?
I would say there probably was a net add, maybe a couple hundred people.
Right, okay. Net add of a couple hundred people, but they had to make those investments. But how many of you have corporate R&D centers? How many of your business units have to help fund it? So there's not like this untested model for how you fund stuff, right? You know, we can go back to the principles that allow our businesses to function, and, you know, everything that's old is new again. You know, what does it Solomon say? There's nothing new under the sun. We're still people, organizations. We still operate business the same way. We can rely on that. This is not a complete disruption of how you run a business. Yeah?
Just to follow up on the question. So were the people that were transferred to CDO, were they owned by CDO, or they were still being owned by BU within their digital factory?
As I understand, yeah, as I understand it, the digital factories were part of a digital transformation organization. Their express purpose was to go and drive digital transformation, make digital transformation happen through projects tied to the BUs. Yes.
I understand that. I'm just trying to say whether the people were functionally transferred to CDO, or they remained in business unit and they were expected to continue digital activities further in the business unit.
I think they were hired, like they hired in people to create this, and 70% came from outside. So they weren't shifting people around from business units.
Just that was my and how many digital factories? Because you said there were some physically enabled.
I'm guessing there was a couple, at least a dozen, right?
We've got 14 business lines, so you can
Okay.
there are 14.
Yeah, at least a dozen.
At least that many.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, Steve in the back.
So on the chief digital officer, you talked about the chief data officer as well. You know, within those 600 people, what that, you know, did that have a team as well that grew, or is that really just kind of a, you know, person driving that individually? Was that a large team as well driving the data side?
I don't know. Do you have any sense? No, I don't know exactly what the functionals, you know, the range. Yeah. So any other questions about the Michelin case study? I know sometimes these case studies are high level, right? We're not doing a real deep dive on everyone. That said, I think they're illustrative. They're not a roadmap for another company, but they're illustrative through the behaviors they took in some of these very important areas, and it allows you to reflect on what have we done, what could we do, how are we thinking differently enough about how we're doing this. And that's what our hope is through these case studies. Yeah, Mike. Mike, right? Yeah.
If I could just
I could just add a comment for some color commentary. One of the things that we did, so this effort started with the hiring of Eric back in 2015. So obviously it took some planning time before they started to execute any change. In 2018, we changed the entire global organization from a product-centric to a customer-centric. And I think that is a real key to the success and reinforcement of this digital transformation, because we went and better understood what our customers' needs and expectations were. We use, for example, Net Promoter Score as one of the metrics to evaluate how likely it is our customers are to recommend us to do business with. And by and large, the feedback we get is, you guys make the really great products, but you're terrible to do business with. And so that was a lot of impetus to go back and look at our customer service systems, our order to cash systems, and things like that. So really focusing on the customer's needs and expectations, and approaching it with the One Michelin a team approach that Tom mentioned was really critical to this success.
Good. Yeah, Spencer.
Yeah, so, you can hear me with the mic.
So I'm curious to know about specific challenges or advantages in being a global organization, and how being global affected this.
Yeah, Mike, why don't you answer that?
Yeah.
So I have been with Michelin for 31 years, all based here in North America, but traveling extensively. I think we travel as much as we digitize. But I think it's a great question, because we have set up different, what I'll call digital concentrations. Actually, our digital operations in Europe are in Lyon. Not in Clermont-Ferrand, where the corporate headquarters are. In North America, we have a separate digital operations office in Charlotte, and that's where a lot of these digital factories that Tom referred to operate out of. There is a lot of digital coordination that goes, or a lot of coordination that goes on relative to this digital transformation. It's not without its road bumps, but one of the things that Tom alluded to was the communication. I just got one yesterday morning. It's an email that comes out every 1 to 2 weeks, and it's Michelin digital culture, and how to transform, and I like to call it cultural infusion. And so you can go through these they're fairly simple learning levels. So you have a digital starter, digital transformer, and then digital passport levels. So there are different levels of knowledge, and it covers everything from vernacular to what we're actually doing in the factories and R&D and customer service to facilitate this transformation. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it's pretty seamless from my perspective, having been with the company for 31 years, as to what happens in Europe is the same that happens in North America, as happens in Asia and South America, et cetera.
Good.
So what's the status now? You're like 6 years into it. Do you still find yourself having to sell this transformation internally with business functions, or is everybody on board?
I don't think so. I would suspect that the business unit leaders of the 14 business lines, they wouldn't be in their position if they were barking up the wrong tree. So I think everybody's bought into it. That's my perception.
There's a question here. Yeah.
So they always talk about digital transformation leading to emerging business opportunities, business models. The cliche one is asset sales to services sales. Did that happen in your case? There was a couple of acquisitions mentioned in the case study, telemetry company, etc. So were there surprises in that? Were those known areas that you guys were targeting, or did they came out of understanding the customer better?
Yeah, I think along with the reorganization of the global business, of course, our core business is tires. Our emerging businesses now are in services and solutions. We have mobility experiences, which includes everything from motorsports to, I'm sure most of you have heard of the Michelin Red Guide and Green Guides for travel enhancement, and our lifestyle products. So we have branded products. And then finally, the fourth pillar is high-tech material research. But In services and solutions, in mobility experiences, we found an immediate need for digital assets, particularly with the acquisitions that we've made in the telematics domain. We acquired a company, Sascar, in South America, NextTrack, based out of Atlanta, and then most recently this spring, Masternaut in Europe, all based on fleet management, which is one of our strengths as a global organization, but a high need for very robust digital platforms to manage those businesses. And of course, there's the value obviously associated with that and the revenue generation.
Good. Do you want to do one last question and we'll do a wrap up?
Yeah, I was going to say we'll have one last question, then I'm going to give Tom the hook.
Yep. Last question? Anyone? Okay, yeah, Rajesh.
So we learned about how people who are already in the business changed. What's happening with people who are coming into the business as new hires or experienced hires? How are you enabling them to embed in this new culture? And the differences would be great to understand as well. What was being done before and what is being done today.
So I think in some cases we have less issues with the new hires. They already come embracing digital technology. So, in fact, their questions are, basically, why don't we have this? Where's this other tool that we need, or something? So, I think they've actually been very supportive in pushing our progress forward at as fast a pace as possible. Generational gaps can be an issue. But that's just, I think it takes the encouragement of the entire team. It obviously starts with the leadership from the CEO all the way down through the business unit leaders. It's showing the value of the digital transformation and making life easier for people. Now, that's tough sometimes in the factory when you are replacing a job that somebody did manually with something that's maybe done more digitally. But in each of the business areas, there's a definite strategy for deployment and for ensuring that the employees buy into it without damaging the core culture of the company. And I think that's the real key, the respect for facts and expertise that Tom talked about.